Greetings, dear friends! I present to your attention the most common malfunctions and breakdowns that are found on the Škoda Octavia. MacPherson and Multilink. With a package for bad roads, that is, with increased ground clearance and additional anthers, the suspension can easily survive up to 120 to 150,000 km without serious intervention. The front levers are almost always steel and the ball joint is replaceable. Even cars from Europe, station wagons, Lauren and Clement and Skoda, for the Russian market have steel levers. Only rare grey imports come across with aluminum ones. The real Multilink is quite simple, with, again, replaceable silent blocks of the levers. The most expensive suspension components are active dampers, which you rarely come across. Of course, if you drive a lot on dirt roads with a full load, then the resource of the rear elements will be significantly lower. For the sake of prolonging life in such cases, there are stiffer springs and even silent tires from the Audi RS3. After 140 to 150,000 mileage, almost certainly the owner is in for a major overhaul with the replacement of ball and support bearings in the front and almost all rubber bands in the rear suspension. The electric rail on the Octavia A5 of the second generation, as on the Passat B6. It is not configured in the best way, but now it is not a problem. For those who want to get a more intelligible steering and a heavy steering wheel, there are firmwares from again Audi RS3 or say Golf R. The disadvantages of the second generation of rails are known. Saw crackers, which have not been lubricated at the factory, begin to knock over time. Poor sealing of both the rack housing and the electronics. Sometimes breakdown of the torque sensor on the shaft due to a broken loop. It is better to update the lubrication in the rail in advance, but in which case all the breakdowns are relatively inexpensively repaired. If you manage to shatter the rail really hard, the used options are inexpensive, but in this case it is better to install a third generation rail, for example from the Golf 6 or 7 or from the Audi Q3. The services learn to fix the mismatch of one attachment on the stretcher and the wiring connector easily. Such collective farming does not carry potential electrical problems, but there are more chances to find a part with low mileage and its reliability is even higher. Almost all cars are front-wheel drive, and the mechanical part is simple and reliable. The slots do not rust, the inner CV joints serve for a long time, but the outer ones can start tapping even after 120. How lucky you are! But most owners have no problems with them up to 100 to 150 morans or more. Oddly enough, there are enough cars on the mechanics, and the choice of manual gearboxes from the Octavia is pretty decent. These are 5-speed gearboxes of the OA4 and OAF series for 1.4 and 1.6, as well as 6-speed O2Q, O2S and OAG, with a dual mass flywheel for 1.8, 2.0 and diesel engines. In general, there are more than 2,000 varieties of boxes. The boxes themselves are quite strong, but the differentials are weak everywhere. They do not like sleeping, as well as dirty oil or lack thereof, especially in combination of the first with the second. The flywheel drives the gears. If it starts to play, then over time it breaks the bearings of the input shaft. The common misfortune of all types of manual gearboxes is the wear and tear of the shift mechanism and its whims. The wear of the ends of the cables and the slider of the mechanism leads to difficult engagement of gears and an increase in backlash. There are only 3 types of automatic gearboxes for the Octavia: a 6-speed hydromechanical automatic IC, O9G, and 2 DSG with selective gearboxes of the DQ200 and DQ250 types. At one time, the IC machine gun was considered an exemplary good choice. After all, this is a classic and a real machine must be reliable. In practice, this is not entirely true. The box is undoubtedly quite sturdy, very comfortable and easy to use, but with reliability, everything is not so simple. There are 2 problems with this box on Octavia with any of the engines. The first is frequent overheating. The used cooling scheme works more like a heating system. The automatic transmission heat exchanger has a thermostat on the engine side, and antifreeze goes into the box only if the engine warms up to 95 plus degrees. So the nominal box temperature here is 100 to 115 degrees. As the heat exchanger is overgrown from the inside with deposits, and with a rare replacement of antifreeze, it takes literally 5 years, the temperature begins to rise further. Oil that is too hot will kill the entire box quickly enough. You can slightly lower the temperature by simply removing the thermostat in the pipe, which will allow the box to warm up less even without altering the cooling system. This is especially effective if the engine also has a cold thermostat of 85 to 19 degrees. Yet, this is not a panacea. The heat exchanger is deadly, so it is worth monitoring the temperature in the box using a diagnostic scanner regularly, even if the thermostat is removed. Better yet, install an external cooling radiator, since this big box is not needed. The second problem is the oil change schedule and the sensitivity of icing valve bodies to the presence of wear products in it. Officials are in no hurry to change the oil even at 60,000 mileage, and to save the valve body resource you need to do this even more often. The owners as always save money. As a result of a combination of two factors, in most cars the box kicks for 120 to 150,000 rounds. The reason, as a rule, is that the pistons are torn, they are overheated and have lost their elasticity, and the body of the valve body plate is worn out. There are leaks in the valves, and possibly the hydraulic plate is locked. If you continue to ride with kicks, a strong mechanical part breaks next. What if the AKP has already been brought to a dying state? Do not rush to change to a robot. This is fraught with compatibility problems. You can consider installing a 6 motor from Fresh Polo or Rapid. Take it up with minimal modifications. You can try to fix it, but repairs can be expensive, since in the traditional box services you can change everything by typing. But even if you come across adequate masters, the repair is objectively expensive due to the complexity, at least that applies to work on the valve body. DSG boxes became a horror story for owners by about the year 12, and with a fair delay. By this time, the reliability of the units was already growing with might and main, but popular rumor could not be stopped. Now the main horrors of the boxes have already disappeared. So, a new clutch unit costs literally 200 euros, a mechatronic exchange will cost about the same amount and maybe even cheaper. There are solutions for repairing pumps, mechatronic housings, hydraulic, accumulators, gearboxes, and even rebuilding clutches. In fact, the 7-speed dry DQ200 is now one of the most cost-effective automatic machines. The problem with the DQ200, specifically on the Octavia, is that this box was installed not only with 1.4 TSI but also with 1.8 TSI. The latter were too momentary for the robot, especially if the owner was fond of cheap tuning. In fact, the 7-speed DSG cannot withstand more than 250 Nm without modifications. For some time comes from 2008 to 2009 with the DQ200 and 1.8 TSI enjoyed the fun of the most problematic Octavias, and the price for them was even lower than for the 1.6 version with mechanics. Now, due to the fact that DSG7 repair has become much more affordable, the SKU is not so noticeable or disappeared altogether. In general, there is nothing to be afraid of, although it would be nice to check with the service book which plugs are on a particular box and which version of mechatronics. There are also cars with forks with balls and miraculously surviving mechatronics of the old model. Well, it is imperative to conduct a comprehensive computer diagnostics in a specialized service, since the DQ200 is diagnosed excellently. DSG6 DQ250 boxes with wet clutch on Octavia are rare. They were normally installed only on RS, although some of them appeared thanks to swaps. There were few all-wheel drive cars. They were quite expensive and were imported from Europe. And the 4-wheel drive itself with the Haldex 4 clutch is not bad, only the oil needs to be changed on time and the wiring should be monitored. The line of motors for Russian cars is quite diverse. On the one hand, very simple and sturdy 1.6 Mpi engines, A12 BSE and related ones. On the other hand, there are a lot of cars with 1.8 TSI of different series and a significant number of 1.4 TSI. Everything else is much less common. All pre-styling 1.4 Mpi, 1.6 FSI and 1.0 FSI, restyled 1.2 TSI, as well as diesel engines and forced 2.0 TSI come across, but rarely. The fate of cars with direct injection and supercharging was unavoidable. The Octavia remained a mass and fairly affordable car, the service culture of which was quite low. The owners often found out what kind of animal tray got into their hands when the oil consumption suddenly grew to a liter per thousand and difficulties began to start. From that era, the myth that a turbo engine must eat oil on the one hand and frenzied turbophobia on the other. The unconvoical leader in simplicity and reliability is the 1.6 Mpi engine, since this is the old EA113 line in the most conservative version with an 8-valve cylinder head and conventional injection, aluminum block with the cast iron sleeves, timing drive belt, oil pump drive chain. The most common option is the BSE without EGR and with variable intake. There are also BGU, BSF and CCSA variants with modernized cylinder head, a lightweight piston and a retuned intake, but such motor is still very simple and compact. The repair of these motors is relatively inexpensive. For the worst case scenario, there are even piston overall sizes. The timing belt drive can potentially serve 150,000, but it is still desirable to change the belt every 60. Among the shortcomings, a moderately pronounced tendency to coke oil scraper rings and leaks in the intake due to the peculiarities of the intake manifold, as well as cracks in the exhaust manifold. You can also note very successful ignition coils and oil leaks from oil seals and gaskets, as well as crankcase ventilation. An indirect disadvantage is a modest return. 102 strength is very little for a rather heavy car, so the motor needs to be toned for active movement in the city, in combination with the conventional poor mobility of the piston rings. These give significant piston wear with runs over 250. However, with careful operation, these motors can run up to 500 plus before overhaul, and many drive with oil appetite for years while there is compression. In addition to 1.6 Mpi, the engines of the EA113 line on the Octavia are found in the three more variants. Extremely rare 8-valve 2.0 Mpi cannot be found, but it's a pity. The engine is structurally similar to 1.6, but better simply because it has more traction. Motors 2.0 FSI 150 HP BLR or BVZ or BLY also belong to this line, but they have a 16-valve cylinder head with an expensive timing chain drive and phase regulator, as well as direct injection. Maintenance of such a motor is much more expensive, especially in old age. There are no repair sizes, plus it has obvious difficulties with a cold start, especially in surface frosts over 20. Rear engine 2.0 TSI 200 HP BWA put on RS also belongs to the EA113 series, but the differences are quite serious. The cylinder head is also 16-valve and the timing chain is also chain driven, as in the 2.0 FSI, but the cylinder block is cast iron, not aluminium. As you might have guessed from the power and the abbreviation TSI, there is turbocharging. There are no repair dimensions, but the block, if anything, fits perfectly under the face value. With a cold start, his situation is much better. Although the injection is direct, the control system for it is completely different, more successful. Tuners are very fond of BWA. Its boost potential is even higher than that of the later 2.0 TSI EA888 engines. Motors 1.4 TSI 122 HP. This is a completely different series EA111. Cast iron block, 16-valve cylinder head, timing chain, turbocharging, direct injection. Moreover, the engine air intercooler is liquid. for 1.8, 2.0 and diesel engines air, and the heat exchanger is built into the intake manifold. About 10 years ago, this engine could be called a problematic one. Very often there were troubles with the timing chain resource, more precisely with chain slip due to unsuccessful tensioner and front cover, in combination with complex fuel equipment and a tendency to detonate due to an increase in inlet temperature and, at the same time, a weak piston group. They made the 1.4 TSI resource unpredictable. In addition, it warmed up for a long time in winter and only the DSG DQ200 box was paired with it. In urban conditions, it was possible to drive only 30 to 40,000 to the oil machine and repair, or to face a refusal due to the timing. But it was possible to drive several hundred thousand. The disadvantages of motors were eliminated for a very long time. In fact, the motors of this line were brought to mind only for the appearance of the next generation Octavia. Its 122 horsepower version became omnivorous, no longer requiring 98th gasoline in daily operation. Questions with the timing were resolved by changing all problematic elements. Then the prices for all frequently replaced components fell, and now the CAXA series motors do not look so bad against the general background, especially those that have been manufactured after 2011 or have undergone high-quality repairs. The resource of the piston group is steadily more than 300,000. They are now inexpensive to repair, they are not very prone to oil appetite, the design is simple. Of the shortcomings, there was only a long warm-up and an unsuccessful hot part of the turbine. Also, from the E8111 line, Octavia comes across 1.6 FSI BLF series, and in theory, cars with a 1.2 TSI engine with a CBZB engine are possible, but such are rarely found on sale. In fact, there are no serious differences in operation from the 1.4 TSI. The motors are even a little simpler. One is naturally aspirated, the second with a simple 8-valve cylinder head. With motors of the E8888 line on Octavia, there are much more problems than with small TSIs. It is interesting that the BYJ or BZB 160 HP engines that appeared in 2008, the EA8888 Gen 1 line has not been seen in the oil pan. More precisely, it appeared when the valve of the crankcase ventilation system (VKG) failed and when the turbine died, but because of the piston group, only when it was worn out and with runs of 250 plus, rarely earlier. Another thing is that they were not problem-free. With a very weak timing belt, with an extremely unsuccessful sleeping tensioner and a low resource chain, they usually traveled less than 120,000 kilometers before being replaced, while the replacement price is several times higher than that of 1.4 motors. Moreover, the lubrication system for the entire line is not particularly successful, and the use of supplying crude oil to the bearings of the balancer shafts and installing mini-mesh filters in them was a frankly bad decision. The shafts wedged at the timing was broken. The pumps ran desperately, the fuel equipment malfunctioned. In short, these are rather troublesome motors, and primarily due to the dampness of the structure. When installing components of the timing and VKG from the second generation and modifications, these motors still serve, but for most of the Octavia A5, the E8888 motors are completely different. The E8888 Gen 2 line theoretically improved, but in practice even more problematic. The second generation E8888 is represented by engines of the CDAB and CDAA 152 HP series, appeared by the end of 2009. With Gen 1, motors share a common conceptual design, but a few common parts. There is a lightweight block and lightweight pistons, other VKG, timing, control system and exhaust manifold. Improvements clearly did not benefit. Such engines often had an oil burner even during the warranty period. In the context of buying a second generation Octavia, we interested in a practical moment, the state of these engines today. Yes, motors can be modified and deprived of the oil appetite, but such modernized variants are by no means the majority in the population. Frankly, unsuccessful engines were made right up to 2011, and before the appearance of black with number 221245. They need a piston group without options. In theory, there are refinement technologies, but it is all cheap collective farming. Additionally, it is worth proactively changing the timing belt tensioner. But all the same, there will be problems with low oil pressure and, as a result, wear of the front camshaft support and breakdowns of the balances. As in the case of the EA111, the price of components and repairs is gradually decreasing. However, all other things being equal, the maintenance of 1.8 TSI will be more expensive than 1.4 TSI. And of course, the motor must be diagnosed very carefully. There are few diesel engines, but it makes sense to say about them in a short line. They are quite strong, like pre-styling EA188 with unit injectors or post-styling EA189 with common rail. The early 16-valve 2.0 motors of the 188 series AZV, BMM and BMN stand out against the general background. They are not very successful here, prone to cylinder head cracking. For motors with common rail, the injectors are piezoelectric, relatively expensive but still cheaper than pump injectors. There are also common problems with the intake manifold flaps, but these are usually already resolved. The main problems of diesel engines on Octavia are usually not constructive at all. It's just difficult to find cars with mileage of up to 200 to 300,000. They are almost all imported from Europe, and they usually take them in order to travel a lot. The excellent interior has become the main competitive advantage of the Octavia. Firstly, it is simply very spacious. The car had no competitors in its class. Even many cars of the formerly high D class of those years were less spacious inside. The quality of the finish is very good, and the ergonomics are excellent, all Volkswagen. Plus, the car looks sleek like a sedan, but there is a full tailgate in the back, so you can use the entire volume of the cabin for cargo. There are also enough cons. Sound, insulation and unimportant seals were mentioned above. At the same time, the inner door handles crack, and sometimes the rear door lock knocks. The hatch makes a lot of noise and leaks, but this is a rare option, found only in imported cars. The ceiling does not like even slight moisture. It peels off easily after dry cleaning or if the car has been exposed to rain with open windows. The door seal covers and the rack cover of the door cards are erased, and on cars with rich trim levels, the soft touch cover of the buttons peels off. On the budget there is no cover and the resource is higher. The luggage compartment trim puffs up on everyone's left. These are not consequences of an accident, but simply a constructive flaw. Well, everyone breaks the ashtray. It's just filmy, and the mileage and attitude have nothing to do with it. The white wiping light switch is just a sign of all Volkswagen-like ones, where the driver constantly turns on and off the deep beam, and does not drive with it all the time. The rear source of the steering wheel and seats is very decent. The plastic steering wheel during normal operation is eternal. With runs over 200, it differs little from the new one. The fabric seats are also very wear resistant, except that the threads in the seams are a little shaggy. Runs of such cars are easy and effortless, especially for simple versions with manual gearbox and without ESP. A leather steering wheel, and even with buttons, is less wear resistant, but with careful use, without scratching with nails and rings, the texture retains up to 100,000, and the normal appearance up to 200. Leather and combined seats are made of leatherette of very mediocre quality. Even in the lowering and clement trim levels, which use seemingly glued leather, the back of the lining is still made of leatherette, and the front side is made of original Alcantara. Leatherette everywhere does not serve very reliably. In the absence of special care, by the age of 5 to 6, creases and cracks become clearly visible and require alteration or masking with liquid skin. In hot regions, problems manifested themselves even during the warranty period, and under heavy drivers, in addition to damage to the upholstery, the seams and sidewall of the seat suffer greatly. The service life of the cabin fan is very small, especially if the climate of the manual and external press filter is not worth it. The plastic of the stuffed tubes ages very quickly and they become brittle. The problem is regular overheating of motors and not very successful antifreeze. Leaks due to breakage of pipes happen surprisingly often. Check them from the side of the engine compartment for collective farm repairs. The air conditioner here is quite hardy. On cars with 1.6 engines with runs up to 200, the air conditioner clutch bearing may make noise, but otherwise everything is assembled well and does not cause much trouble. Corrosion and cracks in pipes are rare, more often after an accident and serious work on the engine compartment. With all the general simplicity of the machine's construction, the electricians of the PQ35 or also 46 platform is very sophisticated, with many blocks and enormous possibilities. It is a pity that the wiring quality is not too high, like many other cars. Typical breakdown places are wiring in the corrugations of the doors and trunk, but there are also breakdowns of the salon harness, moreover in its upper part, under the dashboard and in the engine compartment, after entering the fuse box into the engine compartment and just wiring on the engine. The system has rich diagnostic capabilities, a scanner and a simple diagnostic software are simply necessary, but they will not help find the problem if there is no power on one of the main units or a short circuit occurs in the data bus. Let's add here the increasingly common trouble with the corrosion of the block pads in the cabin, the high load on the generator and water in the engine compartment fuse box. In general, by the age of 10+, Octavia may already have quite expensive and intractable problems in this area. But there is good news as well. Now the price of most electronic units is no longer too high, so the PCM unit, aka a comfort unit, very sensitive to short circuits and other troubles, learned to rewire and repair, and it is not located on the floor, like in previous generations of various Volkswagen models. Passat B5, Touareg 1, Škoda Super 1 and others, but under the front panel of the passenger compartment, which reduces the risks of flooding. The rest of the less vulnerable blocks are also well studied and mastered. Before restyling, cars have no problems with key binding. There are no special difficulties with recording devices, replacing blocks and their firmware. Wide customization options and too easy access to system settings entails the risk of unsuccessful coding, unsuccessful firmware, and simply crooked written non-factory software. We add here the inevitable interventions of electricians to connect new units. In general, it is worth checking the correspondence of the actual and factory configuration, and it is better not to mess with the designs. On this, information about the problems of Škoda Octavia is exhausted. If you know more or do not agree with what you heard, I'm waiting for you in the comments.